Well, the American left-wing media has given us lots to discuss this week, so it's time to bring in media critic Steve Krakauer, also the author of a brilliant book called Uncovered: How the Media Got Cozy with Power, Abandoned Its Principles, and Lost the People. Stephen Krakauer, thanks so much for joining me tonight here. Now, I want to talk about JD Vance here, first of all. And the media is using all their energy now to drive some weird narrative, well, that's the word, that JD Vance is weird and creepy. Have a look at MSNBC's Molly Jong-Fast saying JD Vance also only wants white children in America.
More and more Americans choosing not to have kids, which again emphasizes why JD Vance's comments about childless Americans, childless cat ladies, could be so politically damaging.
Well, so what's interesting is this natalism that comes from an authoritarian playbook, right? That there need to be more white children, right? That's the idea, that there's, this is about great replacement theory, racism, right? This is what this is. So don't misunderstand it for him wanting more children. He wants a certain kind of, racist.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen, but JD Vance is the father of 3 children with his Indian-American wife. What is happening here with this obsession with Vance, and especially this attempt to tar him as weird and creepy?
Yeah, I think there's 2 distinct things happening here. First of all, as you mentioned, JD Vance has a dinner table that's more diverse than the thousands and tens of thousands of white dudes for Kamala Harris Zoom call that had. He is a multi-ethnic family. He has biracial children. So there is a higher level instinct, I would say, by people on the left and within the media, these kind of people who spend all day on Twitter or now X and don't really get outside and touch grass very often, that anyone who has a GOP next to their name is a racist. So that's the first thing that's happening. But then I think what's really interesting, you mentioned this weird, JD Vance is weird. And it's so odd because JD Vance is one of the more normal politicians to run for office. I have to say, I think about JD Vance a little bit like I think about Pete Buttigieg on the other side of the aisle. Pete Buttigieg was the mayor of a small town. He's like just a normal person, and they have very different political points of view. But JD Vance, back when he wrote Hillbilly Elegy, a mega bestseller here in America, multi-million copies sold, everyone loved him. It was a great story. He's a normal person. Then in 2022, he decides to run for the Senate. He is a Republican, but now he is no longer an anti-Trump Republican, which he was back in 2016 and 2017, and now they hate him. And now they have to say, well, he can't be normal. He has to be weird. And because weird can connect with people a little bit better than saying he's a threat to democracy, he's a racist. Those things can't land. No one will believe that. But they try to use this new smear of weird to maybe connect with people and try to change the narrative around him, which I don't really think was working very well with the average person.
But tell me then also, how does this work here that all of a sudden, a switch seems to be kind of flicked, and everybody starts using the same word? How is it that the mechanics of these talking points just get out to all of these news outlets, and suddenly the word on every pundit's lips, every journalist's lips, every Democrat politician's lips? It looks from the outside very suspicious and coordinated.
It does look like that. And I have to say, there are certainly elements of what happens in the media that are coordinated, that are major efforts. I think about like the Hunter Biden laptop suppression story, which was a real coordination between the media, between the FBI, between social media platforms. This one I put in the category of laziness, partisanship. I think really what was at play here is this did come down from the political arm. A little bit like what happened after January 6th. January 6th happened, it was a bad day. But suddenly Joe Biden, was then the president-elect, called it due to the big lie. That he used that term the day after January 6th, and then all of a sudden it was everywhere. The big lie, the big lie. No one even thought to use this until then, but it sounded good. And it's a sort of like it makes for a nice little chyron on the bottom of the screen, or it makes for a nice little sound bite, and everyone's using it, and everyone who's on Twitter, or everyone who's talking to their friends at the DC and New York little parties all uses the same thing. And so I think that's a lot of how this kind of develops. You can't really figure out how to smear JD Vance, but they really want to get him. And I also do think it's not a coincidence that this is happening the exact same time that Kamala Harris is being elevated, anointed, not voted in, but anointed as the new Democratic nominee. And what's the attack on Kamala Harris? She's kind of cringe. She's kind of weird.
Yeah.
So you kind of reverse it. Then you put it on JD Vance, and everyone moves away from Kamala Harris.
It's a bit of a vibe thing again, but, you know, I spoke earlier in the program about how it's been now almost 2 weeks since this, you know, basically anointment of Kamala Harris as the nominee, not formally yet. That'll happen at the convention. The media seems to be going very easy on her. Have they learned any lessons from the way they covered for Joe Biden for so long and then wound up, you know, basically looking at like idiots when they had to turn around and say, oh, no, there was something wrong with this guy? Are they falling into the same pattern of not putting tough questions or trying to demand, you know, press conferences, sit-downs with Kamala Harris, who most of the American people don't really have any introduction to yet?
No, she's been essentially sidelined during this entire Biden administration. She has been very quiet, barely heard from. And you're right, she has not answered more than one question in this entire time. Certainly no sit-down interviews, even a nice friendly interview with MSNBC. Nope, nothing. She is doing absolutely nothing, and they are doing the work for her. And I think that they are not really thinking through this. I have to say, and I've talked to a lot of people in the broader corporate media, some people who are friends and some people who are kind of frenemies. I think they're exhausted by what just happened in July, by that post-debate process of what we all saw on that debate stage of Joe Biden, the truth about his cognitive decline at the end of June, and then the weeks of them, really, the New York Times relentlessly attacking Joe Biden, not in an unfair way, just telling the truth about what's actually happening. All of a sudden, all their notebooks are spilling out there, and it's stressful and it's exhausting. And frankly, it's the side that they mostly support. And it's so now they just feel like, oh, finally, it's not the Joe Biden story anymore. And I think they're just kind of getting a little bit lazy and a little bit complacent right now.
And Steve, finally, before I let you go, I want to ask you about this great piece you wrote in The Hill about the Trump vibe shift after his assassination attempt. And is Trump, in a weird sort of way, actually becoming cool? Tell us about this.
Yeah, I started to think about this a little bit. I mean, listen, the guy got shot in the face. I mean, he literally got shot in the ear, part of the face, and just stood up and started fist pumping. And I watched this interview that Mark Zuckerberg, the head of Facebook, not necessarily the coolest guy in the world, but certainly not a Trump supporter, who was saying it was one of the most badass things he's ever seen in his life. He said, how can you not be proud of America to watch Donald Trump stand up there with the American flag behind him? And then you start looking around. These NFL players, Sauce Gardner, one of the biggest NFL players here in America, saying, that's my president, Donald Trump. He took a bullet for America, another NFL player saying that. There's something happening here. And I think it's something that is something that is beyond what you can do and what you can manufacture artificially with the media and with the establishment and the elite. You can't fake it. It's just something that's real. And I was at the RNC a couple weeks ago. It felt a little bit like that there also. But look, that's all, you know, friendly side. When you start seeing NFL players, when you start seeing musicians, 50 Cent, getting out there and not necessarily being fully supportive of Donald Trump, but just looking at him in a different way. Man, this guy is kind of cool. That something is actually happening that I think we're not totally have our finger on yet.
Well, let's revisit this in a few weeks. Steve Krakauer, thank you so much for your time.